Hello everyone and welcome to part 2 of my Elder Scrolls games Iceberg. This will be a continuation of my last Iceberg video I made back in April of last year. I can't believe it's already been a year, god damn. Just like in the first part, there will be 7 levels in this Iceberg, and they all contain topics I didn't cover or were suggested by people in my Discord server. Link in the description, please join. On that note, my next subscriber goal I like to reach is 25,000 subs in the near future, so like and subscribe for more videos from me. With that being said, let's begin with the Iceberg. Level 1. Original Skyrim Civil War. Now, I know by the way this entry is worded that it implies that the Civil War questline in Skyrim was going to be completely different, but that's not the case. I'm referring to the original scale of the war and how it was cut down due to time restraints. There is so much more to the Civil War that was removed that would have made the questline more enjoyable and engaging than what we got in the final game. The content that was removed would have allowed for the potential of losing battles, consequently impacting the progression of both the Civil War narrative and the associated story arcs. There also would have been randomized missions that each faction, the Imperials and Stormcloaks, would have given you to help out in the war effort, and finally, both Riften and Markarth would have been battles for the factions to take part in, just like with Whiterun, Solitude, and Windhelm in the final game. Windhelm Pit. The Windhelm Pit is a cut location in Skyrim and would have been the equivalent of the arena in Oblivion. If you were arrested in Windhelm, you would have been sent to the pit and fight your way out, rather than waiting in jail like the other cities. Also, interesting fact, Elaine Dufont, the bandit leader from the Dark Brotherhood quest Morning Never Comes, was meant to be an opponent in the Windhelm Pit. No Khajiit and Wood Elf marriages in Skyrim. If you paid attention to all the NPCs that are available to marry in the game, you'll realize that there is no Khajiit or Wood Elves to marry from both genders. Alongside that, it's also worth pointing out that there is no male Redguard or male Altmer options in the game as well for marriage. Skyrim concept art. In the first part of my Iceberg chart, I mentioned Adam Adamowicz, who was a concept artist at Bethesda. After his passing, Bethesda released the concept art Adam made for Skyrim, and I would like to go through some of them as they have a lot of cool ideas that either was changed or did not make it into the final game. Keep in mind that a lot of the concept art probably wouldn't have been possible with the creation engine at the time. Level 2. Nordic Pantheon. Hey, you know what? Isn't it kind of weird that in Skyrim people worship the 9 divines rather than the already established Nordic Pantheon from like a long time ago? And can you at least name one of the gods in the Pantheon, aside from Talos, also called Ysmir? No? Yeah, me too. In total, there are 12 gods in the Pantheon, and most of them overlap with the 9 divines, but with different names. And you even meet some of them in-game, even if you didn't even know that they were actually part of the Pantheon. So they are Dibella the Moth, Hunal the Owl, Kind the Hawk, Mara the Wolf, Stun the Whale, I think that's how you pronounce his name, Shore the Fox, Sun the Bear, yep, it's that guy at the bridge in Sovngarde, Hermamora the Woodland Man, which is mentioned in the Skull Village in the Dragonborn DLC, Moloch, aka Malakath, which I'm surprised he's even in the Pantheon to begin with, Orki the Snake, which is the equivalent to Arche in the 9 Divines, Alduin the Dragon, which yeah, he's in the Pantheon. And finally, Talos the Dragonborn, also Izmir and all those other fucking names. Yeah, it's kind of a shame that they have all of these interpretations of the gods, and yet they don't even use it in the game in the place where this is most prominent in, which kind of sucks. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Dragon breaks. This is a phenomenon where time as we know it is broken and becomes non-linear. The most well-known dragon break happened at the end of Daggerfall when the agent gave control of Numidium to 7 factions at the same time, making all endings of the game canon. Yeah, that's the reason why it's non-linear, because all of them happen at the same time despite all having different consequences in the end, and everything just seems normal after that. Levitation Act. The Levitation Act was a law that was made 6 years before the events of Morrowind, where the use of levitation magic was restricted in the Empire. Now, in Morrowind, you can use levitation magic in the game because, you know, it's Morrowind, but outside of Morrowind, you can't. That's the lore reason why you couldn't levitate after Morrowind, but for me, I think the real reason why levitation was removed in later games was because of the use of world spaces. In Oblivion and Skyrim, you have to load into cities and areas, and if you happen to go out of bounds, you'll see the world in a low poly mess and unloaded entities and such. So maybe that's why they removed levitation, so you couldn't see any of that, because, you know, that's kind of immersion breaking or whatever. Grandfather Frost. Grandfather Frost was the original version of Uncle Sweetshare in the Blood Moon DLC for Morrowind. He was changed because of how similar he was to Santa Claus, but only in appearance and name. He was always destined to be a cokehead through and through. Nerevar and Dagoth were lovers. It's been implied in lore and accepted within the headcanon of the community that Dagoth loved Nerevar, and he probably loved him back as well. But if you dig a little deeper into this, you can discover that it's a monstrosity of a polycule if you throw in the tribunal into the mix. I mean, look at this chart. This ain't no fucking love triangle. It's a goddamn D4 passion rhombus! And since you as the player are the reincarnation of Nerevar, that means Dagoth loves you as well. I'll take that any day of the week rather than whatever the hell Serana Dialogue Overhaul is doing.
And with that, I mean it. Come here, you sweat.
Wow, she just called me a retard and used cultural appropriation at the same time. Is she a fucking gamer? Level 3. The Devourer Book, Ring of Namira, and Wings of the Queen of Bats. I'm just gonna lump these 3 together into one entry as they are all related since they were cut items from Morrowind. The Devourer Book and Ring of Namira only appear as models in the game with no additional information attached to them. The Wings of the Queen of Bats, however, can be spawned in-game and can be played around with, but cannot be accessed through normal means. The Fort Treatment. I have made a separate video covering the topic a while back, so go watch that video for a full explanation. But in short, the Fort Treatment is what I call when a city or town in lore is turned into a fort in-game. There are no examples of this in Morrowind, but there are a bunch of examples in Oblivion and Skyrim where this happens. So again, watch the video. The Syaci are not snake people. The Syaci are the most well-known race from Akavir, but their appearance has been heavily debated on. They are at most described as vampiric snake people who eat their victims whole, but that's not the case. In recent years, especially in Elder Scrolls Online, the notion that the Akaviri are snake people have gone away as their spirits and armor heavily imply that they were another race of humans with Asian-like qualities, as that's the real-life culture they were based off of. Even looking back at Oblivion, you can see their ghosts and skeletons being humanoid, not snakes, and they're clearly labeled Akaviri. And the reason why everyone thinks the Syaci are snake people is that it comes from one source from one book, with the author being anonymous. So yes, that pretty much means that big titty snake girls do not exist. Level 4. Main Pantheon inspired by an ape. The 9 Divines, or the Imperial Pantheon mentioned earlier, was inspired by an Imga named Maruk, whose teachings went on to create the Alessian Order, the predecessor to the Empire of Cyrodiil, along with its religion. So yep, you can just thank this little simian fella over here for what we know as the 9 Divines today. Deadlight. Deadlight is the Daedric plane of oblivion to an unknown prince that was destroyed by Mehrunes Dagon. There's not a lot of information about it, but it could be connected to Athelia, the new Daedric prince introduced, or it could just be completely unrelated to her. Who knows? Daggerfall underwater terrain. During the development of Daggerfall, there would have been parts in the game where you could explore underwater. This was ultimately cut, and the only thing relating to water in the game are flooded dungeons. There are unused sprites and textures for the underwater areas, and for sprites like fish and seaweed. Procedurally generated Morrowind. Morrowind was originally going to follow the same path as the first two games in the series, where the game was procedurally generated. But during the development of the game, the vision changed when Todd Howard, the man, the legend himself, became the director of the game and switched focus to a more handcrafted and tighter experience. It's the reason why only the island of Vardenfell is the only playable area in the game rather than the entirety of Morrowind. If they never made that switch, more than likely we could have explored all of Morrowind properly, but procedurally generated. Level 5. Sex in Daggerfall. Sex was planned as a mechanic in Daggerfall, allowing players to engage in it through favors from NPCs or hiring prostitutes. You know, just by saying that, it sounds like a lot like Amorious Adventures before Amorious Adventures was a thing. Despite its removal, remnants of dialogue related to this mechanic still linger in the game files. But Battlespire, initially conceived as DLC for Daggerfall, and later incorporated this mechanic through dialogue interactions with seducers. So yep, you can get to boning in that game, which is why it's underrated in the series. Cut Elder Council questline in Oblivion. Originally, there was a planned questline centered on the Elder Council, but it was ultimately scrapped as a diverted attention from the main storyline. But to me, that doesn't make any sense because the Elder Council is kind of important in the main story of the game. In this questline, players would have been allowed to ascend the ranks of nobility, culminating in the title of Duke of Colovia, replacing the Duke that was killed in the beginning of the game in Kvatch. Oblivion Goblin Wars. Did you know that there are 8 tribes of goblins in Oblivion? I didn't know this as well. And the more surprising fact about them is that they can go to war with each other. Only 7 of the 8 tribes can go to war, as I believe one of them isn't involved in it due to not having the item needed to start the war, which is a goblin totem staff. Remy Down Under has a video that covers this topic in more depth, so I'll link that in the description below if you want to learn more about this secret hidden mechanic in Oblivion. Construction Kit Ninja Monkeys. If you ever open up the construction kit for Morrowind and looked at where a random enemy will spawn, you'll find a ninja monkey in its place. This is just a placeholder model since again the spawn point is of a random entity from a list and won't show a specific one unless it's not a random spawn point. Level 6. Elder Scrolls didn't mean anything. This entry refers to the fact that in the beginning of the series, the Elder Scrolls name was just added when the focus of the first game, Arena, was changed from a fighting game to an open world RPG. An Elder Scroll made its first appearance in Oblivion, and since then, they've had a bigger influence in the games, such as in Skyrim and Elder Scrolls Online. Azura Explodes. Oh boy, here we go. What this entry is referring to is to a roleplay done on the official test forums back in 2004 with developers at Bethesda. There is a lot of dialogue in this roleplay, but the most well-known and memorable part of the first campaign done on the forums, the Trial of Vivec, is where Vivec sticks his spear, Muatra, into Azura's mouth, causing her to explode. The Beholder. The Beholder is a cut enemy from Arena that only appeared in promotional material for the game. It's literally a copy and paste from Dungeons and Dragons, and most likely the reason why it was not in the final game, due to, copyright. However, in Elder Scrolls Online, a version of them comes back in the form of Watchers. Buying items off shelves in Morrowind. Isn't it weird how certain vendors in Morrowind have their items displayed on shelves and counters as if you can pick up the item and buy it right there and then? But if you do that, it's considered stealing. Well, that wouldn't have been the case as the developers wanted players to be able to buy things off shelves as shown in concept art. It would have been awesome to see this implemented as you don't have to talk to the shop owner to buy what you want. You can just look at it, buy it right there and then. Level 7. Daedric Horse Armor. I know this isn't real, but in an interview with Pete Hines, he brought up Daedric Horse Armor in the discussion about the DLC, which is funny because that never made it into the DLC pack. But imagine if it did. We could be seeing the Horse Armor DLC priced more closer to $5 rather than the $2.49 we know it as today. Seems like we dodged a bullet having expensive downloadable content, am I right? And there you have it, part 2 of my iceberg chart. I know this one is about half as long as the first part, but at this point I am really scraping the bottom of the barrel when it comes to topics about the games, since the rest of the interesting stuff is in lore and that's not what I wanted to focus on. So don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Until then, living in my garage, out. So, is this what the male fantasy is like? A girl comes up to you and calls you a after a game of Overwatch and gives you a sloppy on the mouth.